Due to a love entanglement, I was pushed off the seaside by my fiancée because she wanted me to be buried with her male best friend. After being reborn, I no longer competed with her male best friend out of jealousy. Instead, I chose to leave gracefully. The game of 3 people was reduced to 2, and they should have lived their own lives peacefully. However, my girlfriend and her male best friend ended up perishing together. Ding! Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. My girlfriend's male best friend and I were involved in a car accident. He died on the spot. I was fortunate enough to survive, but I became paraplegic. I didn't want to burden my girlfriend, so I proposed a breakup, but she persisted in marrying me. I was deeply moved and vowed at the wedding to protect her for life. But after the wedding, she brought me to the riverside. If it wasn't for you, Joe wouldn't have died. Why weren't you the one who died back then? You wanted the wedding. I gave it to you. Now, you can go and repay the life you owe Joe. She furiously screamed at me, pushing me along with my wheelchair into the river. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the night before the accident. On the sofa at home, I felt a bit bewildered. The suffocating feeling of being choked by the river was still vivid in my memory. The despair of death, it left me in severe pain. What was most unbearable was the cruel indifference of Becky pushing me into the river while she howled frenziedly. Becky, I deeply loved for 7 years, tossed me into the jaws of death, all for the sake of her best guy friend. Luckily, the heavens granted me a second chance. At this moment, the door to the room opened. Becky, my girlfriend drunken, stumbled in. Arm in arm with her was the somewhat delicate and pretty Joe. Feeling nauseous, Becky staggered into the bathroom and began to retch into the toilet. Joe looked at me provocatively and whispered, "Becky had quite a lot of fun tonight. After all, she's about to marry you. It's reasonable for her to drink too much at this rare bachelor party. I was planning to stay at a hotel near the bar tonight, but she insisted on coming home because she didn't want you to worry. Jason, could you please take good care of her? I'll come over tomorrow to accompany you guys to the wedding photo shoot." If it was before, I would have been furious at his provocation, wishing to duel him then and there. Now, however, I felt utterly calm. In fact, it made me want to laugh, laughing at how foolish and naive I used to be. Seeing my indifferent demeanor, Joe seemed a bit dumbfounded. After all, whenever he provoked me in the past, I would lose my temper and argue with him, even resorting to physical confrontation. Then he would play the victim in front of Becky, who would then scold me for being unreasonable and narrow-minded. Hence, upon noticing my lack of reaction to his provocations, he seemed quite disgruntled. Joe glanced at Becky, who was bent over the toilet vomiting, took a couple steps towards me, and continued his provocation in a low voice. "Even if you two get married, Becky's heart will never belong to you. In her heart, you will never outrank me. You might as well prepare to be cuckolded after getting married." He was so arrogant, deliberately putting his face close to mine. I understood his purpose. He was trying to provoke me into punching him. Then he would get the chance to smear my reputation in front of Becky. He had done this type of thing several times before. Because of him, the relationship between me and Becky had been on the brink of crisis many times. Looking at Joe's smug face moving closer to me, I really wanted to slap him across the face. However, I eventually held back. Hitting Joe wouldn't solve anything, nor ease the hatred in my heart. "Let's leave everything until after the car accident tomorrow." I leaned back a bit, creating a distance between Joe and me. Shielding my nose with a frown, I said, "Could you please keep your distance? Your breath stinks." Joe's face seemed rather awkward. Just as he was about to say something, Becky staggered out from the bathroom. Joe eagerly moved forward, asking with concern, "Becky, are you feeling better? It's all my fault. I shouldn't have let you drink that much tonight." "Jason, what are you still staring blankly at? Hurry up and get some hot water for Becky." I sat motionless on the couch, as though I hadn't heard Joe's words. Before Joe could say anything else, Becky said to him, "You can go home first." Joe softly replied, "Drink more water tonight. and I'll accompany you tomorrow to take our wedding photos." After Joe left, Becky looked at me with a frown, saying, "Are you angry again? Haven't I already told you? We are about to get married, and my girlfriends prepared a bachelorette party for me tonight. Yes, I drank a bit too much, but is there a need for you to be so petty?" I answered indifferently, "So, Joe is one of your girlfriends?" Becky replied somewhat unhappily, "He's my best friend. We've known each other since we were young. He's no different than family in my heart. Jason, I have explained to you so many times, even if you're not fed up with hearing it, I'm fed up with saying it. If I truly wanted to be with him, I wouldn't have chosen you in the first place. I drank too much tonight, and my head hurts. I don't want to argue with you. Let's talk tomorrow." After saying that, she stormed off back to the bedroom. Seeing the bedroom door bolted from inside, I chuckled wryly. It was always the same. Whenever we had a quarrel, whether I was right or wrong, she would lock me out of the bedroom and have me reflect on the living room couch all night. It was only when I apologized that she would forgive me. Thinking back now, I was too subservient in love. Falling in love with her was my biggest mistake in my previous life. Since I've been given a second chance, I definitely will not degrade myself anymore. This relationship, it's time to end it. Everything will come to an end tomorrow after that car accident. I was the one who pursued her when we got together. Becky's family wasn't well off, so she worked part-time jobs and saved money when she was in college, often working as a helper in a restaurant outside of campus. My family was in a better financial state. I didn't like eating in the school cafeteria and often went to that very appetizing restaurant. Little by little, we got to know each other. It was during my sophomore year in college, on a rainy night. A few drunken men were making a pass at Becky. I stepped in to help her out. Afterward, those drunks hit me with a bottle, and Becky was so frightened that she immediately took me to the hospital to get stitches. During those days, Becky often visited me in the hospital, bringing me food and drinks. The guys in my dormitory would tease me. "If this keeps up, you two will have to be boyfriend and girlfriend. Oh God, please grant me a chance to be the knight in shiny armor. Do only the good-looking ones deserve to have love? God is unfair. I would be satisfied even if I had a girlfriend who is half as good-looking as Becky." The incident between me and Becky quickly spread around the school. Even her dorm mates came to ask me when I'd confess my feelings to her. It's often said that boys are slower in understanding emotions than girls, and it is absolutely true. Back then, I didn't understand what love was. All I knew was that during the days I was hospitalized, Becky's image had been deeply rooted in my heart. Perhaps that's what it feels like to be smitten by someone. Not long after, encouraged by my mates in the dorm, I bought a bouquet of flowers and bravely confessed my love for Becky outside the girls' dormitory building. Becky's face flushed in embarrassment as she agreed to be with me under the gaze of many onlooking boys and girls. Back then, happiness overfilled me as I held her in my arms. Now I think about it, did Becky really like me back then? Possibly not. Maybe it was out of a sense of gratitude, or maybe there were other reasons that made her agree to be with me. I thought we would be like those couples in TV dramas, from school uniforms to wedding gowns, then giving birth to a chubby baby, living out our lives in happiness. It wasn't until Joe appeared in our lives, until I saw the unreserved trust and bias Becky had towards him, did I realize all those previous thoughts were just wishful thinking. In her heart, I wasn't even as good as a dog raised by Joe. I considered giving up on this relationship, but I couldn't bear to let go. I can't say clearly myself, is it her I can't bear to lose, or the youthful memories of these years? Entire night I didn't sleep. When dawn broke, Becky walked out of the bedroom. Seeing the overflowing ashtray on the coffee table, smelling the smoke in the living room, she was somewhat angry. She opened the balcony window for ventilation, threw the ashtray and lighter into the trash can and scolded me, quite displeased. "How many times have I told you not to smoke at home? Are you treating my words as wind whistling past your ears again? Are you still upset about last night? Jason, you're becoming increasingly narrow-minded. Can't you learn to be more magnanimous like Joe? Do you know how weary you're making me? If you continue this way, our bridal photo shoot scheduled for today can be canceled. Looking at her huffing and puffing, I took a deep breath and said with a smile, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. With great difficulty, we managed to book a photographer for the wedding photo shoot. If we don't go, we won't be able to get our deposit back. Hearing me say this, Becky's face became slightly calmer. She huffed, saying, Hurry up and take a shower. Change your clothes and wash away the scent of your smoke. Being cognizant of acting for the better, I entered the bathroom. As soon as I finished freshening up, there was a knock at the door outside. Joe arrived. Becky, are you ready? Don't keep the photographer waiting too long. The photographer is my friend. He specifically carved out a day to shoot your wedding photos today. A strong stench of smoke? Has Jason been smoking at home again? I don't want to comment, but does he not know to smoke outside? He knows you're not well. Yet he doesn't care at all when he's home. He really doesn't care about you. Joe cared for Becky in such a sickeningly sweet way that it made me want to vomit. Becky, having seen me freshly washed and ready, said to me, Don't screw up today. Wedding photographs are a once-in-a-lifetime event for a woman. If you botch it up, I won't forgive you easily. I mumbled an acknowledgement in response. Joe, with his back to Becky, shot me a provocative and mocking grin a second time. In my previous life, I could not comprehend the meaning behind this challenging, voicing smile. It wasn't until I reached the site of the photo shoot that I realized he was also dressed in a suit identical to mine. In the midst of Becky and me taking our wedding pictures, he requested Becky to take a set of wedding photos with him. At that time, I cursed at him furiously, even as he feigned a wounded look, claiming that his only intention was to witness Becky's happiest moment. Nothing more. And to my surprise, Becky believed his lies, blaming me for blowing things out of proportion and publicly rebuked me without mercy, taking ridicule from those around us. Equipped with the experiences from my past life, I would naturally steer clear of impulsive actions this time. If you wish to take photos, go ahead. After all, these are your last set. I'll grant you that. We arrived at the beach in a car provided by the bridal shop. Today, the sun is shining brightly, making it the perfect day for a wedding photo shoot here at the beach. At the beachfront, it isn't just us. There are several couples sweetly snapping their wedding photos. However, our situation was a bit unique. After all, it was pretty unusual for a couple to bring along their male best friend during their bridal photo shoot. What's more, after Joe and I put on our formal clothes and suits prepared by the bridal shop, those who don't know us have no idea who the actual groom is. Not only does the photographer and makeup artist shooting our photos give us strange looks, but the surrounding couples taking their wedding photos are also curiously observing us, whispering among themselves. Just after I finished taking a set of bridal photos, Becky gestured for Joe to approach. Joe walked over briskly, and as he passed me, he whispered in mockery, Let me show you how to shower Becky with affection. After approaching Becky, Joe wrapped his arms around her waist. Becky leaned into him, her face brightened by a sweet smile. The photographer seemed even more passionate than before, as he clicked the shutter and directed, Good. Nice. Be more intimate. Guided by the photographer, the behavior between Joe and Becky became increasingly intimate, so much so that they even kissed during the last few poses. As for me, I had completely become a clown. They appeared more like a couple, and I felt like I was merely there to fill in numbers. Of course, this has a lot to do with the fact that the photographer is a friend of Joe. In my past life, I was on the verge of exploding with anger while taking wedding photos, cursing at Joe and the photographer. But now, I calmly sit on a beach chair, sipping a drink and watching Joe and Becky's sweet interaction, as though I'm just a bystander. Seeing my calm demeanor, Becky seemed somewhat guilty. During the breaks in the photo shoot, she specially came over to explain to me, Joe has poor health and has no plans to get married in this life. Today, He's fulfilling his dream of taking wedding photos. Jason, I hope you don't mind. I shake my head and smile at her. As long as you're happy. Just as Becky is about to say something more, Joe calls her to continue taking the next set of photos. She hurriedly told me, I will make it up to you when we get back home tonight. Before I can respond, she happily runs off to continue the photo shoot. By the evening, after capturing a beautiful set of wedding photos under the sunset, we're preparing to head back. At this moment, the photographer's complexion changes and he says, "Oh no, I accidentally deleted one set of photos." Joe quickly steps forward, speaking in an angered tone. "Dude, what are you doing? We've worked hard to take photos all day. How could you be so careless?" The photographer helplessly said, "I didn't mean to. Luckily, it's only a small portion that was accidentally deleted. If there's time, we can make it up another day." Coincidentally, the photos that the photographer accidentally deleted were mostly of mine. In my past life, I had thought of it as an accident, but now it seemed clear that it was a conspiracy between Joe and that photographer. Becky looked at the negatives and sighed in relief. Thank goodness most of them are preserved. Otherwise, this day would have been wasted. As she spoke, Becky glanced at me with some embarrassment. "Jason, about this." Before she could finish, Joe said to me, "Jason, it's late already. When you have time, you can take wedding photos with Becky. Besides, the main character of the wedding photos is Becky. As long as her beautiful side is captured, it's fine. You won't mind, will you? If you want to vent your anger, aim it at me. It's all my fault. If I hadn't taken up too much of your time, you may have been able to take more wedding photos. Even if some were deleted, there would still be a lot left." With an all for Becky and self-blaming demeanor, what else could I say? I smiled. "No problem. We will make up for the wedding photos when we have time." Becky also said with a smile, "It's getting dark soon. I'm starving. Let's just hurry home and eat." Seeing that I wasn't agitated, Joe seemed rather uncomfortable. Becky gave me a satisfied nod, as though she appreciated my understanding. When we left the beach, we were still in the wedding shop's car. In the past, Joe sat in the passenger seat, and I was behind him. After encountering a rogue dump truck, he tragically died on the spot, and I was left with high-level paraplegia. Now, I would naturally not make such a mistake again. "You guys go ahead. I want to take a stroll by the seaside." Upon hearing this, Becky frowned and said, "We've been busy all day, nearly dead from fatigue. Why are you still wandering around here? If you're not leaving, we'll go ahead. I'm tired and hungry now. I don't have the energy to accompany you in your romance here." After they left, I wandered alone by the seaside. The night fell and I sat in a seaside restaurant, drinking beer and eating crayfish, feeling comfortable for the first time in a long while. Without Becky and that annoying Joe, it felt as though I had cast off some sort of heavy burden. The relationship of 7 years felt like a chain binding me firmly. And now, the phrase "having removed the yokes of the past." Only today I truly realized who I am resonates with my feelings. My phone has rung several times. It was Becky calling. I didn't pick up. After I had my fill, I returned Becky's call. On the other end of the phone, Becky screamed at me with a hint of cries. "Jason, why have you been ignoring my calls? Joe had a serious car accident, and both of his legs were broken. The photographer died, and I nearly died in the car too." I gave a non-committal grunt and said in a neutral tone, "I just didn't hear my phone ringing. It's a bit noisy here. Are you okay?" Becky didn't detect my perfunctory attitude. She said urgently through her tears, "Hurry to the First People's Hospital. Joe needs a large amount of plasma. I don't know if the hospital's blood bank has enough supplies. Your blood type and Joe are the same match? Hurry up and donate blood to save his life." Hearing this, I sneered and hung up the phone, turning it off in the process. I thought she was just scared from a car accident and wanted someone to comfort her. I didn't expect her purpose for calling me was to have me donate blood to Joe. "Becky, have you lost your mind?" I was a bit taken aback. Based on the details of the car accident from my previous life, Joe should have died on the spot. The photographer is dead now, and yet Joe is still alive. Is it because I didn't get on that car this time around, causing a slight deviation? But it doesn't matter now. Joe now, with his legs broken, he must be feeling far worse than death. Isn't he? After all, when I was a high-level paraplegic in my previous life, I knew how that kind of pain felt. Around 9 o'clock in the evening, I arrived home. I packed my belongings in a suitcase. After graduating from college, Becky and I moved into this apartment. This place holds too many of my memories. After tonight, I will have to leave. Joe, who is paralyzed from the neck down, needs care, and it's convenient for him to move in here. I guess I'm making room for him. Late at night, around 11 o'clock, Becky came back. She still had dried blood on her, and seeing me sitting in the living room casually smoking, she immediately rushed over with teary eyes. "Jason, do you have a conscience left? Joe is in such a condition, and you haven't even been to the hospital to see him. Thank God the hospital had enough blood in reserve, or else I would never forgive you." She yelled and roared at me as if she blamed me for what happened to Joe. Seeing I didn't react, she angrily slapped me. I didn't dodge, letting the slap hit my face. The fiery pain followed. However, I laughed. I looked at her and said, "I wasn't sure how to tell you." Now, no need for too many words. This slap, consider it an end to our 7-year relationship. "Becky, let's break up." Becky was taken aback, staring at me blankly. Over the years, we had disagreements numerous times, and she proposed breaking up several times in her anger. Each time, I was the one who had to swallow my pride, apologize, and beg for forgiveness. Perhaps she had believed in her heart that I could never leave her. That's why she dared to treat me this way. In 7 years, this was the first time I suggested breaking up. When the disappointment and weariness accumulate to a certain point in one's heart, once a decision is made, it's irreversible. Seeing me pulling my suitcase to leave, Becky finally snapped back to reality. She hurriedly came up and grabbed hold of my suitcase, pleading hastily, "Jason, can you not be so petty? I was wrong just now. I got too emotional and shouldn't have hit you. But Joe was indeed in grave danger at that moment, and you didn't go to the hospital all this while. It's inevitable that my temper flared up greatly. Don't leave. Let me apologize to you. All right?" She still didn't know why I wanted to break up with her. Was it just because of that slap just now? Or was it simply because I didn't go to the hospital to donate blood for Joe? Perhaps in her heart, she still thinks I'm being unreasonable. I unclasped Becky's hand, speaking in a soft voice. "Joe needs someone to take care of him in the hospital. You should go and accompany him immediately. He will be mobility challenged in the future. I can make room for him, and you will be able to take care of him more conveniently. Love is a selfish thing that cannot accommodate a third person." Becky's face turned pale. She pleaded in a trembling voice, "Jason, are you angry because of today's wedding photo shoot? I apologize to you. I will have Joe apologize to you. Can you please not leave? His leg is broken. If you leave too, my world will collapse." I shake my head, saying, "Your world won't collapse. At least you still have Joe by your side." After saying this, I ignored her desperate pleading look and walked straight out the door. I stayed in a hotel for a night. As soon as the sky started to get light, I carried my suitcase and went over to the company dormitory. Supervisor Agnes teased and said, "Little Jason, how come you moved to the company dormitory? Were you chased out by your girlfriend?" I casually laughed and responded, "Yes, we broke up, and I was kicked out." Hearing my words, Agnes was slightly stunned and said, "Weren't you two planning to get married next month?" I gave a helpless smile and did not respond. This matter, after being spoken by Agnes, soon spread throughout the company. At noon, the boss called me for a talk. "Fighting with your girlfriend?" Upon hearing this, I shook my head and said, "Not a fight. It's a complete breakup." The boss didn't comfort me, as he knew quite a bit about my situation. He was my senior back in college. He highly valued me, and I started working with him after graduation. He also knew about the relationship between Becky and Joe. He tossed me a cigarette and asked, "Is it related to that Joe?" I made an affirmative noise. The boss snorted and said, "I told you before that. Joe is trouble. With that stirring stick around, you and Becky definitely won't have a good ending." I said irritably, "Boss, if he's an agitator, what does that make me? If you can't use metaphors, how about not using them at all?" The boss laughed and waved his hand, saying, "All right, let's drop it. Since you two have already broken up, there's a task I'd like to give you. Next month, our branch in the other city will be established, and I want you to go there to oversee it. Is that okay?" The boss had brought this up a few times before, and I had always refused. After all, at that time I didn't want to leave Becky. Now, I certainly wouldn't refuse anymore. When the boss announced publicly that I would be heading to the branch in another city next month, the entire company was shooting me envious glances. In the following period, I started selecting personnel in the company to form a team to take to the branch in the other city. As the days went by, I was busy and fulfilled. On the day I was preparing with the team to go to the branch in the other city, Becky appeared at the entrance of our company. She was pushing Joe, who was sitting in a wheelchair. Becky had become much haggard and was devoid of her past light. Joe had also lost a lot of weight and seemed to have aged by a decade. I didn't want to see them again, but since they made their way here, I might as well spell things out with them once and for all to save them from clinging onto me like a persistent plaster. I walked up to them and silently watched them. Becky had a weary look in her eyes, as if she had something to say but held back. In front of me, Joe tightly held Becky's hand and said to me, "Jason, thank you for letting Becky be with me. Without her, my life would be devoid of light. She is the only motivation for me to keep living now. I heard that you are leaving today. I specially asked Becky to bring me here hoping to thank you in person. In the past, I've made many mistakes. I do hope you won't hold it against me. I am disabled now. You probably won't hold grudges against a disabled man, right? By the way, we're getting married at the end of the month. Don't forget to come and have a toast." His tone was sincere, but in my eyes, this apology and thank you seemed more like a provocation. As if to say, even though I'm disabled, in Becky's heart, you, Jason, could never compare to me. I said indifferently, "Let Becky take you out to bask in the sun more. It's good for your health. Oh, don't go to the riverside. The wind there is too strong, and it's not good for your health." After that, I ignored Joe, turned to a visibly distraught Becky, and said, "Congratulations. Love has finally come to fruition. I might not be able to make it back in time, but I'll make up for the wedding gift." Becky looks at me with sad eyes, her eyes somewhat reddened. She seems to want to say something, but Joe tightly holds onto her hand. Joe, looking rather upset, says to me, "When we get married, try your best to come. The apartment you and Becky used to live in, it's now filled with our wedding photos. You probably haven't seen them yet." Even at this point, Joe is still trying to provoke me, which I find quite amusing. He's just like a clown. Perhaps he never really had any affection for Becky. He just enjoys the thrill of snatching Becky from me. I can't be bothered to say anything more to them, so I simply said, "Then I wish you lifelong companionship and happiness." Having said this, I immediately turn around and leave. From behind me, Joe sternly reprimands Becky. "Why are you crying? Don't tell me you're still unwilling to let him go? If it weren't for you, would my leg be broken? This is what you owe me, and you won't be able to pay it off in a lifetime." Joe's angry rebuke and Becky's crying makes me feel quite unsettled. However, everything from here on out has nothing to do with me anymore. Now that I have let go of this relationship, there's no way I would pick it up again. We human beings always need to look ahead, right? At the branch office in a remote location, I was incredibly busy, routinely working late into the night and even living at the office. 3 months later, the operation of the branch office was finally on track, and I could finally breathe a sigh of relief. One day, my assistant walked into my office with an odd look on her face and said, "Mr. Jason, Becky is here." My assistant was transferred with me from the main office, so she knew about Becky and me. Hearing that Becky had come all the way to the branch office, I was somewhat surprised. At the cafe on the ground floor of our building, the moment I saw Becky, I barely recognized her. Becky had aged significantly, seeming more like a woman in her 40s. What could she have experienced in just 3 short months since we last saw each other? Seeing my puzzled expression, she seemed to understand what I was thinking and laughed bitterly. Have I changed a lot? At a loss for what to say, I ordered a coffee and sat down across from her. She looked at me, her gaze complex, and said, "You, on the other hand, don't seem to have changed much. In fact, you look even younger than before. Since leaving me, it's like you've regained your youth, similar to when you had just graduated college." I murmured softly, "Why are you here? Where's Joe?" Hearing my question, Becky quickly had tears welling up in her eyes. "Jason, I regret it all. Only after you left did I realize how terribly wrong I was. I was too willful. Looking back at all the things I've done, I wish I could strangle myself. I ruined my own happiness. It's all my fault. I can't blame anyone else." After Joe broke his leg, his temperament changed drastically. He either hit or scolded me, always claiming it was because of me that his leg was broken. He wanted me to feel guilty for life, wanted me to stay by his side forever. But it was him who had insisted on joining us when we went to take wedding photos. Why would he push all the blame on me? I've had enough of this life. Becky broke down crying, as if all the grievances she had suffered were pouring out. I listened quietly, being a qualified listener. She spoke a lot, shared our joyful memories, and even talked about her amusing childhood anecdotes and so on, until the setting of the sun. Gazing at the setting sun outside the coffee shop, she murmured, "Regardless of who leaves this world, the sun will still rise the next day. No one is irreplaceable. Jason, if there's a next life, will we meet again?" I remained silent. Who can predict what lies in the next life? Given a choice, though, I'd hope to never cross paths with her or Joe again. Seeing that she wouldn't get an answer from me, Becky looked somewhat disheartened. With a wry smile, she stood up and said, "I'm leaving. I don't think we will see each other again. Can you hold me one last time, like before?" I gently shook my head and replied, "You are now a married woman. It wouldn't be right if Joe found out. Let's not." Without uttering another word, she left the cafe in tears. Following Becky's departure, I resumed my usual tasks at the branch office. A few days later, several police officers arrived and conducted an investigation with me. Only then did I find out that on the day Becky visited me, she killed Joe and threw his body into the river. After meeting me, she went home and committed suicide. The police revealed that Becky left a suicide note filled with remorse, expressing her wish to meet me in the next life where no one else could interfere with our relationship. I was relieved to discover that she didn't implicate me in her note. Otherwise, it could have caused me some troubles. After the investigating police officers left, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, watching the sunset outside, and let out a quiet sigh. She's right. The absence of anyone wouldn't affect the rising of the sun the next day. Life is long. I can't possibly just stand in place waiting. If in the future I still can love someone, maybe I can completely forget her. Becky, the woman I once loved the most. Farewell forever.